Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Sheena and I'm a digital content creator and illustrator based in Brooklyn, New York. So as I mentioned in the last video, I want to do a draw with me and kind of show you guys how I kind of go through my process. So it's not really a tutorial, but more of like a draw with me with questions. Now I pulled all the questions from the last video and I'll be answering them as I complete a piece of artwork in the iPad. Now just starting out with specs, I have a 12.9-inch iPad Pro and I'm using the application Procreate. Now when it comes to my brushes, I'm going to go ahead and put that on the screen as well so you can see them. These are the typical brushes that I use in my pieces. Now if you want to see more draw with me's or more details on how I do this process, be sure to check out my Patreon. I will link it below where I have all of that stuff curated and you can get access to these tutorials for as low as $2 a month. So I just want to show you guys what I've been working on. I had several sketches in here but decided to go with this one. I think it is so adorable and I was really inspired to do locks based on an illustration that I did with Coco Michelle yesterday. So as you guys can see, I've already done the sketch because I am a fairly slow artist and I want to make sure I had enough time in the video to finish this piece. So I'm actually going to show you a time lapse of the sketch and then I'm going to jump into it. Alright, so now that you all have seen my sketch process, let's jump into the piece and also your questions. So the first question comes from Lady Locks. You've actually been on this channel for quite some time, like we're talking years, so thank you so much for your support. So the question she had is about drawing African-American hairstyles. She says, I struggle with making it look realistic. Any tips would be so helpful. You seem to have it down. Thank you so much. Now I feel like I'm not the greatest at drawing natural hairstyles. Like I literally had not done a style with locks really ever, and I don't know why. I was talking to my girl Andrea and she kind of inspired me to kind of step out of my norm. And instead of just doing the average like fro with bangs that I normally do, I'm trying locks for this portrait. Now she actually has a great video on her IG under Coco Michelle Illustrations where she talks about how she does hair. But there are basically three major components that you have to keep in mind. Number one, the hair has to have highlighting. So obviously as we are out in the sun in a room, if there is light, there is daylight, it hits your hair at a certain angle where certain parts of it are highlighted, usually towards the top of the crown of the hair and then down in certain sides. I think it's really important to remember to add those highlights to give the hair some dimension. And when there is highlighting, there also has to be shading. So you have to be very meticulous about shading like the underside, like where the neck meets the hair is usually a lot darker because there is a shadow. As certain strands, like certain locks fall behind others, there should be a shadow. So focusing on your highlighting and shadowing will give the hair more dimension. Now, when we're talking about the texture of the hair, you can do that organically by just finding a brush that kind of has some coarseness to it and just doing either little swirls or little marks to show the like indentations in the hair along with the highlighting and the shading. I know that's kind of hard to understand, and hopefully like as you watch this video and see me do the hair process, you'll see what I'm talking about. But the biggest takeaway is that you have to create dimension by adding that contrast, the highlighting, the shadowing, and things like that. So I hope that helps, and thank you so much for your question. The next question is from, I'm sorry if I butcher this, but it's Mariki Boksum, and they asked, do you have any marketing tips for selling on Etsy? What works the best for your shop? Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube? So I kind of touched on this a little bit in my video that's called Etsy a year later, like what I've learned. But overall, I think if you're starting out, you're not seeing a lot of traction on your Etsy, you have to think about how am I marketing my shop properly? And what that looks like is you doing very grassroots marketing and sharing to your own audience. So I'm going to give you an example. When I had my Valentine's Day launch a couple days ago, I knew, yes, I could pay Etsy to give me better search results or to help me market that product, I could pay for Facebook ads. But what I did naturally was once I posted the product to Etsy, I went to my YouTube, I did a post just letting my audience on there know, like, hey, there's a new product out, here is the link, hope you guys enjoy it. Then I went over to Patreon, I made sure to give my patrons their promo code and also reminded them, like, hey, this product is up. Then I went over to Instagram. I went to both of my Instagram pages, my business and my personal, and made sure to not only share it to my feed, but also to my stories. So really, when I post a product, like I do a launch, I spend at least an hour doing the marketing and promotional side. And none of that has anything to do with paying a platform or paying for SEO or anything like that. So not saying that you cannot use those tools, but I think honestly, when it comes to our shops, we are our greatest tool because we know our audience the best and what translates to them. So I would say start to focus on your audience and where they live on the internet. If that's Facebook for you, then you really hone in on Facebook. Do a really good, curated feed post for that. Maybe also go along and do a story. And then once you do all of that, you can invest in Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and things like that. But before doing any of that, I say you are the marketer and you need to make sure that you're reaching out and doing all these things manually first and then seeing how they work out for you. I'm also not a pro at this. I always say I had the upper hand when I started my shop because I already had an audience. So I was able to kind of pitch my products and services to them. But if you don't have an audience, in my opinion, that should be your main focus at this time. All right, so the next question is from Diana, and Diana asks, I was just wondering how many pages did you illustrate for the book? So as it stands right now, we have about 28 pages in the book, and we're talking front and back pages and then also full spreads. Now that's subject to change because we're having a copywriter kind of look through the wording and how it matches up with the images. And at this stage in the process, there is a very good chance that we'll end up either condensing or just cutting pages entirely if they don't help with the flow of the story. But right now, we're on a solid 28 to 30 pages. All right, thank you for your question, Diana. And the next question is from Bodacious Brittany. I love that name. Okay, do you have any particular art goals for this year? Either something you want to improve on or experiment with? Love that question. So to be honest, I know that a lot of multidisciplinary artists like to dip and dabble into different things like canvas paintings, acrylic, watercolor, maybe doing sculptures. But to be honest with you, I'm very big on refining the skills in the medium that I'm using right now before I jump into something else. And if I do those other things, it's mostly for fun. But right now, because I am predominantly a digital artist, I'm focused on not only learning the inner workings of all of these applications, basically figuring out the UI and perfecting it, but also working on things like anatomy. So how to draw hands, feet, eyes, building the structure of a face properly, 3/4 view, just things that seem fairly boring in the scheme of everything, but would actually make me a much better artist in the end, because we can all find a photo and trace it. But I think there was so much skill and mastery behind looking possibly at a reference image, but with no tracing, none of that, and doing it all from scratch. So that is my biggest focus this year, is just refining the skills that I already have before I move on to something else. Thank you so much for your question. Okay, the next question is from Anna, and she asked, how long have I been working on the book? So the great thing about working in Procreate is you can literally clock your time, because every canvas has a tracked amount of time that you're physically working. So what I've done is actually gone through every sketch, every outline, every document that I basically have that has to do with this book, and I go back and track that time. The last time I tracked it, which was a few weeks ago, I was about 200 hours into it. I know that sounds crazy, but here we are. So I'm about 200 hours into it. I'm projecting that I'll probably hit around 350 when everything is said and done. But I will say, starting out in the beginning, I was just a lot slower getting these concepts down, because again, I'm not like a perfect artist. Like, I'm still working on things like perspective views and building out landscapes and environments. So it just took me a longer amount of time to get used to that. So that's why I'm now clocking around 200 hours, but that's not extreme for doing a 30-page children's book. But yeah, I hope that helps, and thank you for your question. And the next question is from Kathy Herring. And her question is, which came for you in your opinion? Which is the best way to start? Working on building up a social media following on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, or creating your shop and merch first? Thank you so much for your question. So when it comes to my personal experience, I started out with an audience first. And it was because my end goal was not like, let me get people to buy from my shop. I just already been creating content, and the idea of creating a shop came years after that. So for most of you who have been here for some time, or maybe you just got here and you click back through my directory of videos, I've been on YouTube for going on 9 years now, and on and off, of course, but I've been making content online for almost a decade, between YouTube, MySpace back in the day. I had a little stint on Facebook, now I'm predominantly on Instagram, but that's where I built my audience. So by the time that I was ready to open a shop, I already had a larger audience already following me. So I was able to kind of point them to the shop link, have them support me through there. So that is my experience. However, you don't have to do it that way. I just can't necessarily speak to what it looks like to open a shop first and then go and find your people, because that's not my experience. But if I had to give any advice on which to do first, I always say build the audience first. I think it can be very trying on a shop owner to open a shop and you've worked really hard on 5 to 6 different products and prototypes, and then it just sits there in your shop because no one knows that it's there, right? So you can be the best artist out there, the best sculptor, the best knitter, but if you don't have an audience to kind of market that product to, it's just not gonna sell. Like, you're not gonna get anything out of it. So while you may get like a couple of random window shoppers, as I call them, on Etsy, I think most of my sales and support comes from my audience that I already had, that I built organically. So I would make that your focus. But who knows, I'm not a pro, but that is my experience with it. So thank you so much for your question. Okay, so the next question comes from Marsha Anyama. Again, sorry if I'm saying that wrong. My question is, how often do you use Skillshare in a week or a month? Do you have a particular time to go on and take classes? I have Skillshare but feel like I'm wasting it. I do some classes, but I'm not as regular as I would like to be. Thanks for asking. So when it comes to Skillshare or any other learning platform on the internet, one thing I've noticed is that when I'm drawing, I'm usually able to multitask when it comes to listening to a podcast or music or watching an anime, whatever it may be. But now I have just chosen to swap out that other activity for a class instead. So yes, I could be listening to an album that I've heard 3 or 4 times already, or I can tap into Skillshare and bring up a course. And when you're choosing courses, I do agree with you that it's definitely based on where you are in your career and what you're looking to do. Seeing that I just mentioned that I'm focused on anatomy and character design, those are basically the classes that I am focusing on. So if I'm sitting down with my iPad getting ready to do a piece like this one right here, I turn on Skillshare on my computer in front of me and I'll watch a course about character design, or I'll type in anatomy basics or portrait basics and I'll watch that as I draw. So that's basically how I get the most out of the platform, but it really depends on what you're looking to learn. I know that some fields and some topics are very saturated on the platform, and some you don't see as much. It just really depends on what you're studying. But whether it's Skillshare, YouTube, or any other platform out here that you're trying to get lessons from, I just think it's important that you find a way to catch up with those classes every single day. Like, just carve out the time for it. Some of these classes you don't even really have to watch. You can listen and kind of pick up on these concepts. So whether you're cleaning, drawing, who knows, and you want that background noise, try to make more of that background noise a class rather than a song or a random show on Netflix. So I hope that helps, but that's basically how I make time for it. All right, the next question is from Confidently Dina, and they ask, what was the process like for you and Hayat to go from her story to your drawings? How did you know what she wanted to be visualized? Did she give you detailed descriptions or more of a basic outline and left it up to you? What a great question, Dina. So honestly, if the author of the book, the agency, the publishing firm is not giving you any direction, I would say it's grounds to be slightly concerned or worried, because at the end of the day, your job as an illustrator is to bring the author's story to life. So there was no way that Hayat could have said, I want a story about a girl who is struggling with her confidence and self-doubt. Go draw. Like, it could never happen that way. So our first like bulk of meetings was Hayat basically talking to me about what she saw and visualized each character being like. So when we talked about Maya, she made it very clear, like, I don't want her to be super lanky. I want her to have some weight on her. She should have fairly kinky hair. She gave me pictures of her nieces, and I was able to kind of take both their skin tones and kind of make something somewhere in the middle. She mentioned that she wanted her to have bigger cheeks because she had bigger cheeks as a child. So as the author is kind of giving you these small cues, you should be taking notes so that when you go back to actually do the character, you're adding in all of those things and making sure you're not adding in any deal breakers. So that's basically how Hayat and I did it. I can't speak for everyone else's process, but I'm very particular about asking those detailed questions in the beginning, because the last thing you want is to assume what the author or the agency wants. You go in and do all this work and they hate it, right? So I was very particular about, like, spill it all. Tell me everything you want to know about every single character. What colors are your deal breakers? What styles are your deal breakers? And went by that. So not super like professional or anything like that, but I think it's just a general way of finding out what the needs are of your client and going for it. This also works when you're talking about commissions. Like, I'm very particular with my clients. Like, do you want me to copy a specific reference photo, or do you want me to use my creative vision? What are your deal breakers? What do you want included, excluded? So it's just how you ask those probing questions in the beginning. But I hope that helps, and thank you so much for your question. All right, the next question is from Just Jess, and she asked, what is your process when choosing color palettes for your personal Etsy product or artwork? Do you choose colors before, during, or after? So I want to say it kind of depends, because there are times I've gone into a piece with no color palette whatsoever and just kind of went with the flow. And usually, if you notice, I do skin tone first, because depending on the shade of their skin, it can dictate a lot of other colors, like what hair color goes against the skin tone, because you don't want it to clash or merge together. So I always start with skin and then go from there. However, 95% of the time, I figure out my palette ahead of time, because it just makes things go by smoother. So even when it comes to this particular character, I went on Pinterest and I actually saw a girl wearing an outfit very similar to this. And I really love the way that the green, like hunter green overshirt looked. And so there is a feature in Procreate where you can basically make a palette out of an existing picture in your camera roll. So I screenshot that picture, I pulled it into Procreate, and it made the palette for me. And then from there, I kind of play around on the color wheel and see what complementary colors I can add in there myself, like the blue jeans and things like that. But yeah, I predominantly start with a color palette because it just makes my life easier. It already takes me a super long time to finish portraits like these, like we're talking hours. And so choosing ahead just kind of gives me a straight and direct guideline to follow, and I'm not all over the place choosing colors for like hours. There are also websites like Scheme Color or Coolers, and basically they make palettes for you ahead of time. So you can go on there and you can say, I only want to use 5 to 6 different primary colors. And the website will give you these different palettes along with their hex numbers and all of that. And you can start from there. And in the beginning, when I was really struggling with color theory and finding what colors work together, I leaned on Scheme Color all the time. Like, I literally have it bookmarked, and it just gives you some really good ideas. And even if I don't use a palette in that moment, I may just save it for a future project if the colors really speak to me. So I'd recommend getting on Scheme Color, clicking around, just saving various palettes, because you never know when you're going to need them. And keep in mind, these are pre-curated, so they're usually colors that just work together naturally and are going to look good in whatever piece you put them in. But that's what I use, and I hope that helps. All right, so the next question is from Fatima or Fatima. But I have a story for a children's book, but I'm afraid of not executing it as I am imagining it in my head. Basically, writing and illustrating will be by me. Do you have any advice? Seeing that I'm not writing this children's book, I can't really give a lot of advice on that. I'm not in particularly like a good writer. I can write, but it's not like my strong suit. However, I do have friends who are writers. Of course, I'm going through this process with Hayat as she's writing the book, and my biggest takeaway would be to have the writing done first, because whether you're illustrating it or you end up commissioning someone to do it for you, the job of the illustrator is to take the words from the manuscript, from the book, and bring them to life. And so if you don't have the words done already, it can be very hard to work in reverse, because you're basically doing dynamic poses and expressions based on words that don't exist, and they may not align once you put them together. So it doesn't matter if you're doing the illustrating or not. I think it's really big that you do all of the writing up front. Like, get that done. Number one, have that finished. Get a copywriter or an editor to look over it if you need them to, and then move on with the illustrating part. And that's when you may see that certain things don't go together, but you won't know that if you're trying to do both of those things at once. So that's what I would recommend. I really wish I had better advice on that, but I'm not in the industry of writing or writing children's books, so I'm not really sure if that was helpful. But rule of thumb, start with the writing first, and good luck with your book. So the next question is from Anna, and Anna says, I'm in a rut and I really need ideas for art, whether it's digital or hard copy. How do you get inspiration? There is not one piece of your art that I don't like. Thank you so much, Anna. That's one thing we do not agree on, because I don't love every piece of art that I have, but you know, you live and you learn. So when it comes to finding inspiration, I'm glad you asked this, because towards the end of 2020, mentally, I was just not there. And if you guys follow me outside of YouTube, then you would see like my Instagram content kind of slowed down. The same passion wasn't there. And I think it just comes from the fact that when you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it. Like, we're humans, we're not robots. And there are times where it doesn't matter how many movies you watch, how many pictures you flip through on Pinterest. If you're not feeling it, you're not going to produce. And what I found that has really helped me in the new year to basically draw every single day and have a new piece on Instagram 2 to 3 times a week is actually practicing my craft and learning new things. Like, I can't explain it, but once I started to take more classes on like how to do better portraits, how to color pick, anatomy, I felt more creative. Like, I was excited to try out these new theories that I just learned, and the spark just kind of took off from there. So I'm not going to be one of those artists that tells you just keep drawing, the inspiration will come, because that's not true. Like, some of the worst work that I have done has been work that I've forced myself to do. When you're not feeling it, sometimes you got to just step away. But being able to give yourself some grace and say, I may not be feeling it now, but let me try to take a course that may help me to get back into the groove of things, that will get you a lot farther than forcing yourself. So again, try to take some classes on things that you don't feel as confident in, and you'd be surprised how much that empowers you to try new things and to keep creating art. Also, I'm sure you all know this, because every artist that I follow and love follows the same type of virtue, but you have to use references. I want to say one of the biggest things in the new year that has really helped me is if I'm sitting on the couch, it's 10 o'clock at night and I can't figure out what to draw, I will hop on Pinterest and I'll type in things like, you know, dynamic poses or weird faces or things like that, and then I'll just start sketching. And before you know it, you may sketch a particular face and really like the way that it looks, and then it takes off from there. Even with this portrait you all see me drawing right now, it's literally based on a reference that I found on Pinterest of a girl holding a camera and smiling. And I basically took that image, kind of followed the silhouette and sketched it out myself, and then I said, you know what? I like the pose, but I want to make this my own. So I changed out the way that her camera looked. I changed her hair. Her hair was very straight. In this one, you can tell she has locks. I changed her skin color, and I completely changed her outfit. So while I did get my foundation from an existing image, you would never be able to find that image on Pinterest and say, wow, Sheena copied this, because I made it my own. So I think references will save your life. I know it sounds so simple, but I live in Pinterest. I live on these websites that have reference photos, because that kind of gives me a starting point rather than just sitting and staring at a blank canvas and not knowing where to start. So I hope that helps. Basically, take more classes online and use references every single time. And eventually you'll create your own flow and the creativity will just come. And if it's not there, give yourself some grace and just step away from the iPad and come back to it when you're ready. So I hope that helps, and I hope you find some inspiration and a little spark sooner than later. All right, and our final question to wrap this up is from Choli. I'm really sorry if that's not how you pronounce it. But Choli says, I'd like to use Procreate soon for my illustrations, but I'm totally lost on what brushes I should use. Could you show us your favorite ones? So towards the start of this video, I kind of showed you all my go-to like 4 or 5 brushes that I always use, but I go even more in depth on my Patreon. Don't mean to continue to plug, but to be honest, like I've already posted it there. I don't want to do this thing where I'm reposting the same thing to multiple platforms over and over again. So if you have it to spare, the $2, I have blog posts on Patreon where I literally show the brushes that I use through my process. Now, to be honest, I never use the same brushes every time. Like I tend to start with the same 1 or 2 brushes, but then I try to experiment with every single illustration that I do. And that's the way that I kind of broaden my options, because Procreate actually has a lot of great brushes built in, but we tend to kind of stay on the top side of the options and just choose like sketching brushes and things like that. But if you scroll down and you go through every single folder, you'd be surprised how many awesome brushes are in there, and you can't really figure out what they do if you don't try them. So I didn't really figure out what brushes to use by like looking at what other artists use. I just knew that I wanted to create a certain type of effect, and to create that effect, I needed the right brush, the right tool. So I would go through every single folder in the Procreate brushes and literally try each one. Another thing that I do from time to time is start a brand new canvas, grab brushes, and just do samples like on a canvas, so that if I ever need to go back and reference, I can say, okay, I know what that brush looks like in real time. So that should help you with kind of choosing. But from time to time, I do purchase brushes, depending on if I just want to support that artist. And again, I'm looking for a new tool to try, but you won't know until you try them. So I say try all the brushes. So that's basically it with all the questions. Thank you all so much to everyone that submitted. And if I didn't get to your question, I'm so sorry. Hopefully I can in the next one. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave you all with the remainder of this time lapse. I really, really hope you enjoyed this piece. Once I get off camera, I do want to tighten it up a little bit, add a little bit of my, corrective editing to it in Lightroom, and then I will have it posted to Instagram so you guys can see the final product there. I think I will also be making this an art print, so if you're interested in that, it will be up in my Etsy shop, Brooklyn Post, so you can check it out there. But thank you all so much for joining me for this draw with me. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to see more like these, please let me know, because as a creator, what I create on this channel is based on feedback from all of you. So if you enjoy these time-lapse drawings as much as I do, please let me know below in the comments, and I'll be sure to do them more often. So thank you all so much for joining me, and this is your girl signing off. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.